Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you to an extremely impressive young lady, Oleksandra Matviychuk. Oh, I've done that wrong. Matviychuk, is that correct?
Matviychuk.
Matviychuk, who is a human rights lawyer, a human rights defender. She runs something called the Center for Civil Liberties. She is associated with the University of Kiev in Kiev, Ukraine, and she's been traveling the world and making speeches and representations. And I think she's got a list of topics that are really quite interesting to speak with us about today. Oleksandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. So tell me, how did you become a human rights lawyer and defender?
When I studied in school, I got acquainted with Soviet dissidents. It was a powerful intellectual movement, and it were fantastic people who have a courage to fight against the whole totalitarian Soviet machine. And it were people who tell what they think and do what they tell, who bravely stood up their voice for the freedom and for human dignity. They were jailed, subjected to forcible psychological treatment. A lot of them were killed, but they didn't stop. And this example inspires me so much when I find myself in the circle of these people that I decided to study law to fight myself for freedom and for human dignity.
Obviously, the Russian invasion of Kiev and Ukraine is the most atrocious, occurrence that's been happening in your country in the last while. What has been your involvement in that? I understand that you've been studying Russian war crimes. Is that correct?
I have been documenting Russian war crimes for 9 years already, because for the majority of the world, this war started in February 2022, but the truth is that this war started in February 2014. When Ukraine obtained a chance for the quick democratic transition after the collapse of the authoritarian regime due to revolution of dignity. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia started this war. Russia occupied Crimea, part of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and last year extended this war to the large-scale invasion. And why I'm emphasizing it? Because it's very clearly shown that Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. So my organization was the first human rights institution who sent mobile groups to Crimea, to Luhansk, to Donetsk region to document Russian war crimes. And I personally interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told me horrible stories, how they were beaten, raped, packed into wooden boxes, electrically shocked through their genitalia, and their fingers were cut, their nails were turned away, their nails were drilled. I will never forget how one woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon. So last year, when Russia started large-scale war, we faced with unprecedented amount of Russian war crimes. And we united our efforts with dozens of regional organizations. We built all Ukrainian network of local documentator. We covered the whole country, including occupied territories. And now in our database, we have more than 57,000 episodes of war crimes.
50,000 episodes of war crimes.
57,000.
57,000. That's unbelievable. I did not realize that there were war crimes after 2014.
It's very sad to hear, because we sent numerous reports what Russia did in occupied territories to UN, to Council of Europe, to OSCE, to European Union, but nobody paid interest. And that is why this evil multiplies, because Russians started to believe they can do whatever they wanted.
So it is terrible that you were publishing this information and that the world wasn't paying attention. I interviewed someone recently from France who believes that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was because of threats of expansion of NATO into Ukraine. What do you think caused the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
But it's not true. In 2014, Ukraine had a zero chance to join NATO. Ukraine has only one chance, which is so important for us as a people in Ukraine, a chance to provide democratic reforms and to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And because this idea of freedom came closer to Russian border, Putin started this war in order to stop us. Because as each dictator in the world, Putin is afraid of freedom.
Afraid of freedom, afraid of democracy.
Like it's something which will ruin his regime sooner or later.
You wrote, I think, really quite interesting, that human rights lose their significance if only human rights activists, diplomats, and experts are involved in their protection, and that protecting human rights is the task of an entire society, especially businesses. Why?
Because human rights, it's our oxygen. When you breathe, you don't think how it's going on. Like you breathe naturally. You don't know about this chemical and biological reaction that's going on in your body. But when there is a lack of oxygen, then you understand and you are in big trouble. The same with the human rights. And I totally believe that the problem which we have in our world is not because only that fact that in authoritarian regimes, the space of freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is also that even in well-developed democracies, the current generations start to openly question the universal principle of the Declaration of Human Rights, because these current generations inherited system of democracy, rule of law, and human rights from their parents. They have never fought for this system. They don't know the real meaning of freedom. They take freedom for granted. They start to believe that freedom, it's a possibility to make a choice between cheeses and supermarket. But the truth is that freedom is very fragile. You can lose this freedom very rapidly. Not long time ago, like 1 month, I was in a panel with a former minister for women affairs from Iran. You know what's going on now in Iran. Can you imagine that, like some period ago, they have a minister for women affairs, and this minister was it was woman.
What's happened in Iran? Nothing. From a women affairs standpoint, from a women's rights standpoint, we've gone backward big time, correct?
Now in Iran, women are fighting for their rights to be treated like human. And this is a very difficult fight because they face with a whole repressive state machine.
Well, you know, it's going to be really interesting chatting with you about what's happened with human rights. And I think that you're right that that people have forgotten how critically important it is at times. And you have been a fighter for human rights, not only in Ukraine, but around the world. And you've won the Peace Prize because of that. And I want to understand a little bit more about what your fight is all about and how you are fighting your fight. But we're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. 2 minutes. Now we're going to talk more about human rights and peace. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm really honored tonight to be chatting with Oleksandra Matviychuk, who is a human rights lawyer, human rights activist, and she won last year the Nobel Peace Prize. And it's amazing that in the midst of a war and all the human rights abuses, that you can have people that are fighting as strongly as you are to document those human rights abuses and to speak about them, about the world, to make sure that people are well aware of what's going on. Oleksandra, we're living in a world where we do get, TV news, pictures, videos, social media posts, not only obviously in Ukraine, but most recently in the last couple of weeks from Israel and the Hamas attack into Israel. And so anyone that is doing something inappropriate is likely going to have their activities publicized, videotaped, and exhibited. Why do people still do this? Why do we still have war crimes? Why do we still have human rights abuses like the rape and mutilation that you talked about just a few minutes ago?
Because we still have impunity. All this hell, which we now face in Ukraine, is a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committed horrible war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They start to believe they can do whatever they want. Like, let me tell you several stories from what we are documented.
Please.
Because I'm sure there is no justification for Russian actions. There is no legitimate purpose to force people go down to the basement, to order them to appoint several volunteers, and no purpose in shooting these people. There is no purpose to have a fun using the tanks, firing at people on the bicycles, whose bodies lay scattered around the streets until liberation. There is no purpose to break someone's house, killing the owner and raping the wife next to her 9-year-old child. And there is no purpose to shoot the 14-year-old boy in a close range who was just playing with his ball in a yard. And there is no military necessity in doing such things. Russians did these horrible things only because they could, because they enjoyed impunity for so long. And we must break the circle of impunity. And this is my task and task of my team. We not just document all these crimes around the country, which Russians committed for 9 years already. We are fighting for justice, to establish a special tribunal on aggression, to hold Putin and top political leadership and high military command of Russian state accountable. And that is why I have to travel so much in different countries to visit their president, their government officials, parliamentarians, journalists, and convince that in 21st century, the only methods how to stop aggressive war is to punish those who start such wars.
So you say there's no military purpose, but I guess I have real difficulty believing it's just evil, that it's just people that enjoy harming others. Is it terrorism, and that therefore they just want to create terror and fear and have the civilian population give up? Or do you think it's just evil?
There is no military purpose in meaning of international humanitarian law, because civilians can't be a military purpose. And that's why I tell this. But there is a very pragmatic and cynical and very cruel goal. Let me tell you one also very cruel psychological experiment, which was done past century. The group of scientists beat animal with electricity when this animal, I don't remember, probably it was dog, tried to eat something. And every time when this dog make attempt to eat, this dog was beaten with electricity. And it's resulted in situation that the poor dog decided to die in a hunger pain, but not trying to do any attempt to survive. So I think that Russians try to multiply this cruel psychological experiment in the frame of the whole nation, because they deliberately provide a lot of pain to civilians in order to break our resistance. This is the way how Russians try to win this war. They use a tool which I call enormous civilian suffering to occupy the country.
Enormous civilian suffering. Terrorism. Is this ordered, or is it people just acting on their own? Soldiers just acting on their own?
It's an order and it's a culture. And this is culture which based on impunity.
So you actually think that there's Russian generals ordering their soldiers to rape and pillage and assassinate civilians?
Let me provide you a clear example how it's work in reality. Probably you remember that when Russian troops was pushed out from Bucha, and a lot of foreign journalists arrived to Kiev region, they found the dead bodies of civilians who lay scattered around the streets. And our mobile groups and these journalists found the same dead bodies in gardens of their own households. We found the dead bodies of civilians, men, women, children, with their hands tied under their back in the mass graves. We found dead bodies of civilians in civilian cars, which was shelled by Russians while they trying to escape from this dangerous zone. So the photos and videos and a lot of articles in different languages appeared, and the world was shocked because of the brutality and cruelty of Russians. And what Putin did? Putin provided a military recognition to the Russian army unit who was in Bucha. And it was a signal to the whole Russian army: you can do whatever you want. You can rape, you can kill, you can torture civilians. I will give you a medal. So it's not just simplifies to that some general wrote the instruction that you have rape so much women or men in this concrete village. No, it's not work like this. It's working because everybody knows that such behavior is appropriate behavior in Russian army. And if you did such horrible things, you will get recognition from a top political and military command.
And so your argument is that they do this primarily because nothing's going to happen to them. It's impunity. How are you going to make sure that things happen to them?
They do it with the two goals. First, they try to break resistance of the people. And that's why they organize a terror. It's not easy to occupy the territory, but it's much more difficult to say the control over this territory. And that's why they deliberately exterminate people there. And that's why they organize this raping, abducting, torturing, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. Just provide a signal to the population of this territorial community that if you will resist, even peacefully, we will kill you in a very brutal way. And second goal, as I told, it's because they have never been punished for such kind of behavior. I interviewed and worked with victims of this war directly, and they told me that the perpetrators were confident they have never been prosecuted. Once again, Russia destroyed Aleppo. Russia helped Assad in Syria to kill civilians with the chemical weapons. But what was the reaction? The civilized world closed eyes for all these atrocities that Russia did in Syria. They continue shake Putin's hands. They do business as usual with Russia. They build gas pipeline. So no surprise that then when Russia started large-scale invasion, they did the same horror in Ukrainian city Mariupol. And I believe that we must break the circle of impunity and demonstrate justice, not just for Ukrainians, not just for people in Syria or other countries who suffered from Russian war crimes, but in order to prevent a next Russian attack to the next nation, we have to prove that in 21st century, people who commit horrible atrocities, they will be punished.
And so what's there going to be? Is there going to be another Nuremberg trial, or is this going to be at the Hague, or what's the vehicle of which your documentation is going to be presented to and people are going to be punished?
It's a good question. I will try to describe the accountability gap which we face for current moment, because from the beginning of this large-scale war, I started to ask to myself, for whom do we document all these crimes for? Because I know what the problem is. The problem is that there is no international court for current moment who can prosecute Putin and his surrounding for the crime of aggression. All these atrocities which we document, it's a result of their leadership decision to initiate, to plan, and to start this bloody war. So they have to be punished for this. And this means that we have to establish a special tribunal on aggression, like Nuremberg, and hold these people accountable. And the problem is that when we came with this very simple idea, which is based on common sense and human values to political leaders, I understand that they still look to the world through the prisma of Nuremberg trials, where Nazi war criminals were tried, but only after Nazi regime had collapsed. But we live in a new century. Justice shouldn't be dependent on how and when wars will end. We cannot wait. We have to establish such a tribunal now and hold Putin, Lukashenko, and their surrounding accountable. So this is the first dimension of this accountability gap. And there are second dimension, because we have crime of aggression, but we have also other crimes which Russia committed in Ukraine. It's war crimes, it's crimes against humanity, it's genocide. And here we have International Criminal Court, who recently issued the arrest warrants to Vladimir Putin and his child commissioner, Maria Lvova-Belova, for this forcible deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. But we can't rely only on International Criminal Court activity. International Criminal Court will limit its investigation only to several selected cases, which means that the vast majority of crimes will be still a responsibility of national system in Ukraine. And to show you the problem, I will tell you that for current moment, Office of General Prosecutor in Ukraine started investigation of more than 110,000 criminal proceedings. Can you imagine the burden of responsibility to effectively investigate more than 100,000 criminal cases? It's impossible, even for the best national system in the world. It means that we need international assistance in order to do it, to provide chance for each victims of these more than 100,000 cases for justice.
100,000 cases. And in the Nuremberg example, Nazi Germany was defeated and effectively occupied by the Western forces and Russia. And so bringing those people to justice was, I guess, reasonable and easy because they could have been found. But if the end result of this war, which I frankly hope it is that Russia is returned to outside of the Ukrainian border and Ukrainian territorial integrity is reestablished, I don't think anyone's dreaming about an invasion of Russia. And so how can we bring Russian soldiers and political people that are guilty of war crimes to justice? How?
We have to start with a special tribunal on aggression to show that even Russian top political leaders will be accountable for the crimes. And this will be a huge signal to the Russians in general. And in this regard, the justice will have not only effect for future, but effect for present. Because when people are so confident they can do whatever they want, they abducted, robbing, raping, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. But when suddenly even part of Russians start to think that probably this time they will be prosecuted because, look, the special tribunal was created and they started legal procedure even against Vladimir Putin. So when they start to be in doubt about their safety, this can have immediate effect for their behavior. And when we speak about large-scale war, this frozen effect for brutality to human rights violation mean that we can save thousands and thousands of lives. And I
Go ahead.
I know that now it can seem like very difficult to imagine how we will punish all Russians who committed these crimes with their own hands and their top political leadership and high military command. But let me remind you that authoritarian regimes collapse and their leaders who see this as untouchable appeared under the courts. And we have a lot of examples from history of humankind. Like, let's remind the Milosevic case. When Serbia didn't want to transfer Milosevic to The Hague, but Serbia did it. Hence, the next regime in Serbia understood that they want to restore the connection with civilized world. And international crimes have no statute of limitations, which means that people will be persecuted for all their life.
You know, I really congratulate you for your efforts, and I'd love to chat with you in far greater detail about the Nobel Peace Prize and what you and your organization are trying to accomplish, and the role that you're playing. It's just unbelievable that this is happening in the 21st century. You know, I like to believe that I'm a student of history, and you read what happened during World War II, and you read about the gas chambers, and you read about war crimes, and you think that was ancient history and never to be repeated and never to happen again. And now you're documenting hundreds of thousands of incidents. It's just shocking. Thank you so much for the role that you're playing in bringing this to the world's attention. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're having a conversation tonight that I'm enjoy is not the right word because it's a terrible conversation, but it's with a very impressive young lady, Oleksandra Matviychuk, who is a human rights lawyer and runs a human rights organization. And her organization won the Nobel Peace Prize last year for the efforts that they have been working on to bring Russian war crimes to the international community and to make sure that that there is not impunity, as she describes it. Oleksandra, let's take a step back if we could. Tell me a little bit about you. You graduated from Kiev University in 2007 and just launched your human rights effort then. Is that correct?
Yes, I founded the Center for Civil Liberties in 2007 when I finished my university. But it was a time when I tried to combine two goals in my life. I'm from a poor family. That's why I started to work very early, from the first class of university. And I had a vision that I will combine two goals. I will make a successful judicial career as a commercial lawyer, and I will do something good for society. But if I probably I will succeed with this vision when while living in France or in Switzerland or in Germany, but I live in Ukraine, and for that moment, it was a time when authoritarian regime strengthened. And like the last drop for me to understand that I have to concentrate on human rights protection was when in bank field where I work as a lawyer happened one interesting story. The president of Association of Ukrainian Banks made a press conference and he publicly criticized the previous authoritarian regime in Ukraine for his financial policy. And next day, a tax police came to Association of Ukrainian Banks, and as a revenge, they issued a false criminal case against the association and subjected them to pay millions and millions of fine. And this was my last drop. I understood that I have to concentrate on human rights protection, and I stopped my commercial career.
And since you've been doing human rights work?
Yes, I start to concentrate it only on human rights work, not trying to combine my commercial work and my work for society.
And you're, I believe, coming to us right now from Florence, Italy. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm here for the International Film Festival, where they presented a film devoted to Ukraine.
And do you still live in Ukraine, in Kyiv?
Yes, I live in Kiev, and I'm always happy to return to my city, regardless that fact that my native city, like others of thousands of Ukrainian cities, are constantly being shelled by Russian rockets. And today, for example, the first what I did when I got up, I started to check my messenger, because while you sleep in peaceful Florence, you have no idea what happened during the night in your home. And I check messenger just to know, while I still have a home to return, are my family are still alive? And this is a ritual which millions of Ukrainians are doing, because even if you sleep peacefully in your city, doesn't mean that your family in another Ukrainian city wasn't bombarded.
What is day-to-day life like in Kyiv today?
Oh, it's difficult to describe, because when you came to Kiev, you will have impression that everything more or less okay. People are smiling, the restaurants are working, the theaters are providing performance. So incredible resilience of people. But it's just, we just pretend that we have a normal life. It's not normal life at all. Everything which we call normal life was ruined. The possibility to go to work, to hug your friends, to meet with them in a cafe, to have family dinner, to meet your beloved ones, it's disappeared in one moment. Because to live during the large-scale war, it means to live in total uncertainty. You have never idea what will happen in the next several hours. It means to live in constant fear for your beloved ones. Even if they are not in Ukraine armed forces, but in Dnipro, there is no safe place in Ukraine where you can hide from Russian rockets. So it's very difficult life. It's not normal. And I would never wish any nation to go through this experience, because war is horrible. But I would like to emphasize that these dramatic times provide us opportunity to express our best human features, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to take burden of responsibility, and to help each other. And I see this like fantastic wave of solidarity across the country, how people risked their lives for others whom they never met before. And when you risked your life for others, this is something which makes you acutely aware what does it mean to be a human.
How did you react to winning the Peace Prize, or your organization winning the Peace Prize?
My first thought was that it's a joke. I'm a human rights lawyer. I'm not celebrity. We are not stars. We are not sportsmen or singers or like famous people in the country. We human rights lawyers who do our work honestly, and that's all. And like we never even dream about Nobel Prize. But when I realized that it's not a joke, I understood that it's provide us additional responsibility, because the Nobel Peace Prize give the opportunity for voices of human rights defenders to be heard. And it's very important, because for decades we wasn't heard. We always tell all these years that politicians have to base their decision not just on economical benefits or geopolitical interests, but on values of democracy and human rights, that it's important to base your decision on the values, because even if you benefit in short-term perspective, you will evade for catastrophe for a long-term perspective. And now we have this possibility to be heard in these rooms where political decisions are taking place. And we try to use this possibility because we have no time. We are dying. The time for Ukraine resulted in numerous deaths in battlefield, in numerous deaths in Dnipro, in numerous deaths in occupied territories.
Oleksandra, how is this all going to end in Ukraine?
We can win this war. Let me remind you, when large-scale invasion started, not just Putin, but our international partners were confident that Ukraine has no chance to resist because Russia is so enormous opposing power. Russia was 11th economy in the world, has a much bigger population and strong military potential and nuclear weapons. But very soon it became obvious that people who are fighting for their freedom and their human dignity are much more powerful than even the second army in the world. And our partners told, let's help Ukraine not to fail. And Ukraine obtained first weapons to be able to defend ourselves. And first real sanctions against Russia were introduced into force. But this is a time to change this narrative to another one. Let's help Ukraine to win. Because there is a huge differences between let's help Ukraine not to fail and let's help Ukraine to win. And we can practically measure these differences in types of weapons, in gravity of sanctions, and speed of decisions. Democracies must win wars because only spread of freedom make our world safer.
Can we go back to your first argument about why these human rights abuses, these war crimes occur? You said that it was because, number one, people could do it and not be brought to justice. And number two, because of terrorism and that they thought that it would scare the rest of the population, the citizens, into agreeing. I think that actually terrorism is counterproductive. That what it does is it unifies a population and it disgusts the rest of the world in the barbaric acts that the aggressor engages in. And so therefore, number one, it's inhumane, it's terrible, it's evil, and shouldn't be done. And that's the most important thing. But then number two, it actually doesn't work. I think when you publicize information about the war crimes, the West's desire to help Ukraine increases, and our disgust in what the Russian army and the Russian political establishment are doing and supporting increases our desire to support you. And I think that we've seen this in Israel and in Hamas again most recently. So I think that it's just dumb. Number one, it's wrong, and that's the most important thing. It's evil. But then number two, it actually is dumb. It doesn't work. It actually means that Ukrainian people are more unified, that NATO is more unified, that Finland, that Sweden have joined NATO, that people want to destroy this barbaric action even more than they would have if they hadn't committed the war crimes. What do you say to that?
Unfortunately, such barbaristic acts very rational. And they can work in the long term when people lose their belief. What do I mean? Let me describe you how it's work with such crime as sexual violence. Because sexual violence, it's a crime when perpetrators, through the concrete individuals, try to target the whole community. What is the technology? The people who survived of sexual violence, they feel shame. People who witness this, their families, their neighbors, their partners, they feel guilt because they can't stop this. And other members of community start to feel fear because they can be subjected to the same type of crime. And all these different feelings, shame, guilt, and fear, start to ruin the social connection between people in the community and help occupiers to save the control because they ruined unity and they ruined belief. That's why it's so important to react very decisively to war crimes. I think that Russian miscalculated. They don't know Ukrainian spirit. When you open any sociological survey, you will see that freedom is the first value for Ukrainians. And that's why Russians can't broke us. We will keep fighting, because if we stop fighting, there will be no more us.
Oleksandra, there's maybe 25,000 people in Toronto, Canada, listening to you right now. What do you have to say to them?
I will say that I'm very grateful for support which Ukraine received in this dramatic time of history. We survived also because of you, because you start to do something in order to help us in this horrible situation. And I understand that sometimes, like, we can feel ourselves helpless, like this, because we face with such enormous opposing power. But ordinary people have a much great impact that they can even imagine. And ordinary people, when they are united, they can change history quicker than the UN intervention. And we need your support.
Ordinary people can change history. That's a wonderful, idealistic thought, but I think you're doing that. And I don't think you're ordinary. You're spectacular. Thank you so much for the efforts that you're engaged in. Congratulations on winning the Peace Prize, and I hope I get to speak with you again.
Thank you very much.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. I remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM.